Margaret Chen pushed her heavy cart down the long hallway of the Harmony Concert Hall. The wheels made a soft squeaking sound on the shiny marble floor. It was 11 o'clock at night, and the big building was quiet now. All the people who came to watch the music shows had gone home hours ago. She stopped at the first door and pulled out her keys. The metal ring was heavy with all the different keys she needed for her job. Margaret had been cleaning this concert hall for 15 years. She knew every room, every corner, and every stain that appeared on the fancy carpets. Her hands were rough and dry from all the cleaning chemicals. Her back ached from bending over to scrub floors. At 52 years old, Margaret felt much older than her age, but she never complained. This job paid for her small apartment and put food on her table. That was enough. Margaret opened the door to the first practice room. Inside there was a beautiful black piano. The wood was so shiny she could see her face in it. She had cleaned this piano hundreds of times, but she never touched the keys. That was not her place. She was just the cleaning lady. She sprayed the eye cleaner on her cloth and wiped down the piano bench. Then she carefully cleaned around the piano keys without pressing them. Margaret had learned to be very careful around the expensive instruments. The managers had told her many times that these pianos cost more money than she would make in 10 years. As she cleaned, Margaret remembered something from long ago. When she was a little girl in China, her grandmother had an old piano. It was not shiny like this one. The wood was scratched and some of the keys stuck when you pressed them, but it made beautiful music. Margaret's grandmother had taught her to play when she was only 5 years old. Every day after school, she would sit on the hard wooden bench and practice. Her small fingers would stretch to reach the keys. Her grandmother would sit beside her and guide her hands. Music is the language of the heart, her grandmother used to say. It speaks when words cannot. Those were happy days. Margaret's family was poor, but they had music. Her father worked in the rice fields and her mother took care of the house. But in the evenings, when the work was done, they would gather around the old piano. Margaret would play, and sometimes her grandmother would sing old Chinese songs. Margaret finished cleaning the first practice room and moved to the next one. This room had 2 pianos. She cleaned them both, being careful not to leave any streaks on the shiny wood. As she worked, she could almost hear the music that filled these rooms during the day. She had seen the music students through the windows. They were young and well-dressed. Their parents drove expensive cars and wore fancy clothes. These students took lessons that cost hundreds of dollars. They played music that Margaret could only dream about. Sometimes when Margaret was cleaning, late at night she would stop and listen. The sounds from her memory would mix with the silence of the empty rooms. She would remember her grandmother's hands showing her where to place her fingers. She would remember the feeling of the keys under her own small hands. But that was a long time ago. That was before everything changed. When Margaret was 12 years old, her grandmother got very sick. The family had no money for doctors or medicine. They had to sell the old piano to pay for food and rent. Margaret watched as strange men carried her beloved piano out of their small house. She never saw it again. After her grandmother died, there was no more music in Margaret's life. Her family needed her to work, not to play piano. She helped her mother with cooking and cleaning. When she was older, she worked in a factory. Music became just a memory from childhood. When Margaret was 25, she married a man named David Chen. He was a good man who worked hard at a restaurant. They decided to come to America to find a better life. They saved every penny they could and bought 2 tickets on a big ship. America was not what they had expected. The language was hard to learn. The people were different. David and Margaret both had to take jobs that paid very little money. David washed dishes in restaurant kitchens. Margaret cleaned offices and houses. They lived in a tiny apartment with thin walls and old carpet. There was no piano. There was no music. There was only work and worry about paying the bills. David died 5 years ago from a heart attack. He was only 51 years old. The doctor said he worked too hard for too many years. His heart just stopped one day while he was washing dishes. After David died, Margaret felt more alone than ever. She had no children. Her family was still in China, too far away to visit. All she had was her job cleaning the concert hall. But Margaret never felt sorry for herself. She had learned long ago that life was hard, and complaining would not make it easier. She did her work well and tried to be grateful for what she had. Margaret moved to the main concert hall where the big shows happened. This room was huge, with hundreds of red seats facing a large stage. The ceiling was very high, with beautiful paintings and gold decorations. During the day, this room was filled with music and applause. At night, it was empty and quiet. She started cleaning the seats one by one. As she worked, Margaret looked up at the stage. There was a grand piano in the center, much bigger and more beautiful than any piano she had ever seen. The stage lights were off now, but she could imagine how it looked during a concert, with bright lights and a pianist in fancy clothes. Sometimes Margaret wondered what it would feel like to sit at that piano and play music again. But she pushed these thoughts away. That was not for people like her. She was just the cleaning lady. Her job was to clean, not to dream. Margaret finished cleaning the main hall and went to the lobby. This was where people waited before the show started. There were comfortable chairs and small tables. In one corner, there was an old piano that nobody used anymore. It was not as nice as the others. Some of the keys were broken, and the wood was scratched and dull. The managers kept saying they would throw this piano away, but they never did. It just sat there, forgotten and ignored, like Margaret herself. She cleaned around the old piano carefully. As she dusted the keys, one of them pressed down and made a soft sound. Margaret quickly pulled her hand away and looked around to make sure nobody saw her, but the sound brought back so many memories. For just a moment, she was 5 years old again, sitting beside her grandmother, learning to make music with her small hands. Margaret finished her cleaning and put her supplies away. It was almost morning now. Soon the building would fill with people again. The music students would come for their lessons. The office workers would start their day. The important people would have their meetings. And Margaret would go home to her small apartment, invisible once again. Saturday night was different at the Harmony Concert Hall. Instead of a regular music show, there was a big fancy party. Rich people came dressed in expensive clothes to give money to the concert hall. They called it a fundraising gala. Margaret had to work late that night. The party would make extra mess, and she needed to clean up after all the guests went home. She watched from the hallway as people arrived in long, black cars. The women wore shiny dresses and sparkling jewelry. The men wore black suits with bow. These people had more money than Margaret could ever imagine. They bought tickets to the party that cost more than Margaret made in a month. They did not notice the cleaning lady watching from the shadows. The party was loud and full of laughter. Margaret could hear music and talking from the main hall as she worked in the practice rooms. The guests ate fancy food and drank expensive wine from crystal glasses. Margaret had seen many parties like this over the years. The rich people came, ate good food, wrote checks, and went home feeling good about helping the arts. They never thought about the people who cleaned up after them. At midnight, the party moved from the main hall to the lobby. The guests wanted to keep talking and drinking. Margaret tried to stay out of their way as she finished her cleaning, but it was hard to be invisible when so many people filled the small space. She pushed her cart quietly toward the old piano in the corner. This broken piano had been there so long that most people forgot about it, but tonight one of the guests noticed it. "Look at this old thing," said a man with gray hair and a red bow tie. His voice was loud from drinking too much wine. "Does anyone even play this anymore?" A woman in a blue dress laughed. "It looks like it belongs in the trash," she said. "Half the keys don't even work." More people gathered around the broken piano. They thought it was funny to find something so old and damaged in such a fancy place. "Someone should get rid of this," said another man. "It makes the place look cheap." Margaret kept working, trying not to listen. She wiped down tables and emptied trash cans, but she could not help looking at the piano. Even broken, it was still beautiful to her. "Hey," said the man with the red bow tie. He had drunk too much wine and was feeling bold. "Maybe someone here can play it for us." The group looked around at each other. These were business people and lawyers, not musicians. They all shook their heads and laughed. "None of us can play piano," said the woman in blue. "We just write checks to support the people who can." That made everyone laugh even more. They found it very funny that they had so much money but could not make music themselves. Then the man with the red bow tie noticed Margaret. She was trying to clean quietly near the piano, hoping they would not see her. "Wait a minute," he said, pointing at Margaret with his wineglass. "What about her?" All the guests turned to look at Margaret. She felt her face get hot and red. She wanted to disappear, but there was nowhere to hide. "The cleaning lady?" asked the woman in blue. "You want the cleaning lady to play piano?" The man with the red bow tie thought this was the funniest idea ever. "Why not?" he said. "It would be perfect. The broken piano and well, you know." He did not finish his sentence, but everyone knew what he meant. To them, Margaret was just like the broken piano, old, worn out, and not worth much attention. "Come on," said another man. "It will be fun. She can play us a song on the broken piano." More people heard the commotion and came over to see what was happening. Soon there was a crowd of 20 or 30 people all looking at Margaret. "Play." "Something," called out a woman with diamonds around her neck. "Any song will do." The guests started clapping and cheering. They thought they were being friendly and fun. They did not understand that they were asking Margaret to be part of their joke. Margaret stood frozen next to her cleaning cart. Her hands were shaking. She had never had so many people looking at her at once. All her life she had tried to stay invisible. Now she was the center of attention, and she did not know what to do. "I don't know how to play," Margaret said quietly. But her voice was so soft that most people could not hear her over their talking and laughing. "Don't be shy," said the man with the red bow tie. He walked closer to Margaret, stumbling a little from the wine. "Everyone can play a little something. Just hit some keys. We won't judge." The crowd laughed again. Of course they would judge. That was the whole point of their game. "Yes, play something," shouted another guest. "Even if it sounds bad, we'll clap." Margaret looked at all the faces staring at her. Some people were smiling, but their smiles were not kind. They were the smiles of people who thought they were better than her. They wanted to watch her fail so they could feel good about themselves. A few guests had taken out their phones to record what they thought would be a funny video. They expected to see the cleaning lady embarrass herself trying to play the broken piano. "Come on," said the woman in blue. "Don't keep us waiting. We want to hear the cleaning lady concert." Everyone laughed at that. They thought it was very clever to call it a cleaning lady concert. Margaret felt trapped. She could not just walk away with all these people watching her, but she also could not do what they wanted. It would be too humiliating. She looked at the broken piano. Some of the white keys were chipped. 3 of the black keys were stuck and would not move. The wood was scratched and faded. It reminded her of herself, old, damaged, and forgotten. "Maybe she's scared," said one guest to another, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "She probably doesn't even know what a piano is," said someone else. The comments got meaner as the guests got more impatient. They had drunk too much wine and they wanted their entertainment. Margaret felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She had faced many hard things in her life, but this felt worse than anything. These people were treating her like she was not even human. They saw her as something to laugh at. "Look, she's going to cry," said the woman with diamonds. "We should leave her alone." But the man with the red bow tie was not ready to give up his fun. "No way," he said. "This is the best part of the whole party. Come on, cleaning lady. Just play one song. What's the worst that could happen?" The crowd started chanting, "Play, play, play." They clapped their hands and stamped their feet like children demanding a toy. Margaret closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In her mind, she could hear her grandmother's voice from so many years ago. Music is the language of the heart. It speaks when words cannot. Maybe it was time to let her heart speak. Margaret opened her eyes and looked at the crowd of rich people. Their faces were red from wine and excitement. They were expecting to see her fail. She thought about all the years she had spent being invisible. All the times people had looked through her like she was not there. All the dreams she had buried to survive in this hard world. Margaret walked slowly toward the broken piano. The crowd got quiet, excited to see what would happen next. She pulled out the old bench and sat down. The crowd moved closer, phones ready. To record her humiliation, Margaret placed her hands on the keys. They felt cold and familiar at the same time. She had not touched piano keys in 30 years, but her fingers remembered where they belonged. The rich people waited, smiling and ready to laugh. They had no idea what was about to happen. Margaret was about to show them that you should never judge someone by how they look or what job they do. She was about to prove that beautiful things can be hidden in the most unexpected places. But first, she had to find the courage to let her secret out after keeping it hidden for so long. Margaret sat on the old piano bench with her hands resting on the broken keys. The crowd of rich people stood around her in a circle, waiting for the show to begin. Their faces were excited, like children watching a circus act. She could feel her heart beating fast in her chest. Her hands were sweating and she wiped them on her cleaning uniform. The rough fabric felt strange compared to the smooth piano keys. Behind her, someone whispered, "This is going to be hilarious." Another person said, "I can't wait to post this video online." Margaret's stomach felt sick. She knew these people expected her to fail. They wanted to laugh at her and then go home with a funny story to tell their friends. The cleaning lady who thought she could play piano, what a joke. She stared down at the keys. Some were yellow with age. Others were chipped and cracked. 3 of the black keys were stuck down and would not move when she touched them. This piano had been forgotten and ignored, just like her. Margaret remembered the first time she sat at her grandmother's piano. She was so small that her feet could not reach the floor pedals. Her grandmother had to put books on the bench so Margaret could see the keys properly. "Don't be afraid," her grandmother had said. "The piano wants to make music. You just have to show it how." But that was so long ago. Margaret was not a little girl anymore. She was a 52-year-old cleaning woman with rough hands and an aching back. What if she had forgotten everything her grandmother taught her? "Are you going to play or not?" asked the man with the red bow tie. His voice was getting impatient. Margaret looked up at all the faces staring at her. There were at least 30 people now. More guests had heard about the entertainment and came to watch. Some were holding their phones up, ready to record whatever happened. She wanted to stand up and walk away. She wanted to tell them she had work to finish and disappear into the hallway like she always did. That would be the safe thing to do. That would be the smart thing to do. But something stopped her from leaving. Maybe it was the wine glasses in their hands that reminded her of how rich these people were. Maybe it was their expensive clothes that showed how different their lives were from hers. Or maybe it was the way they looked at her, like she was not a real person, just something to entertain them. Margaret had spent her whole life being invisible. She had learned to keep quiet, keep her head down and never cause trouble. She had buried her dreams so deep that sometimes she forgot they were still there. But sitting at this broken piano brought back memories she had tried to forget. She remembered how music used to fill her grandmother's small house. She remembered the feeling of creating something beautiful with her own hands. She remembered being proud of something she could do. "Maybe she doesn't know how," said the woman in the blue dress. "Maybe we should find someone else." No, said the man with the red bow tie. "She's going to play, aren't you, sweetheart?" The way he called her sweetheart made Margaret's face burn with shame. He was talking to her like she was a child or a pet. Margaret placed her fingers on the keys again. The cold touch brought back muscle memory from decades ago. Her left hand found the low notes, and her right hand rested on the middle keys. Even after 30 years, her hands seemed to know where they belonged. She closed her eyes and tried to remember her grandmother's lessons. "Feel the music in your heart first," her grandmother used to say. "Then let your hands tell the story." What story did Margaret want to tell? What was in her heart after all, these years? She thought about her childhood in China, when music was the most important thing in the world. She thought about leaving everything behind to come to America. She thought about working hard jobs for little money. She thought about David, her husband, who died too young from too much work. She thought about 15 years of cleaning this concert hall, watching other people live their dreams while she emptied their trash cans. Margaret opened her eyes and looked at the crowd again. They were getting restless. Some people were already starting to turn away, bored with waiting. "Come on," said someone in the back. Play something or let's go back to the party. The pressure was building. Margaret felt trapped between her fear and their expectations. She could feel sweat on her forehead and under her arms. What if she played badly? What if her fingers had forgotten how to move properly? What if the music sounded terrible on this broken piano? These people would laugh even harder. They would record her failure and share it with the world. But what if she played well? That thought scared her even more. If these people discovered she could really play piano, they would want to know why she was working as a cleaning lady. They would ask questions she was not ready to answer. Margaret had kept her secret for so long that it felt like part of who she was. Revealing her talent would mean revealing her past, her dreams, and all the pain of losing them. "I think she's scared," whispered someone nearby. "Of course she's scared," replied another voice. "She probably never even touched a piano before." Their words made Margaret angry. These people thought they knew everything about her because of how she looked and what job she did. They saw her uniform and her rough hands and decided she was not worth their respect. But they were wrong about her. They had no idea who she really was or what she had given up to survive in their world. Margaret's grandmother used to tell her that music was a gift from heaven. "Not everyone can make music," she would say. "If you can, then you must. It is your duty to share this gift with the world." Had Margaret failed in that duty? Had she wasted her grandmother's gift by hiding it for 30 years? She looked at the broken piano keys again. This old instrument was like her, damaged but not destroyed. Maybe they could make beautiful music together, even if they were both imperfect. The crowd was getting louder and more impatient. Some people were already walking away to get more drinks. The moment was slipping away from her. Margaret took a deep breath and made her choice. She would not let these people define her anymore. She would not hide her gift any longer, even if it meant facing their judgment. Her fingers found the opening notes of a piece she had learned as a child. It was Chopin, one of her grandmother's favorite composers. The melody was beautiful and sad at the same time, full of longing and hope. Margaret pressed the first key and a single note rang out in the lobby. The sound was not perfect. The piano was too old and broken for that. But it was music. Real music, coming from her fingers after 30 years of silence. The talking in the crowd stopped. People turned back to listen. Margaret played the second note, then the third. Her left hand found the bass notes while her right hand carried the melody. The broken keys forced her to change some of the notes, but she adapted the music to fit the instrument. As the melody grew stronger, Margaret felt something awakening inside her. It was like finding a part of herself that had been sleeping for decades. Her fingers remembered movements she thought were lost forever. The music flowed from her hands like water from a spring. The crowd stood perfectly still now, listening in amazement. This was not what they had expected at all. Margaret kept playing, letting the music tell her story of loss and survival, of dreams hidden but never completely forgotten. The broken piano sang under her touch, proving that beautiful things could still come from damaged places. For the first time in 30 years, Margaret was not invisible. She was not just the cleaning lady. She was a musician, sharing her gift with the world, just as her grandmother had taught her to do. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 filled the lobby like magic. Margaret's fingers moved across the broken keys with grace she had forgotten she possessed. The music flowed from her hands as if it had been waiting 30 years to escape. The crowd of rich people stopped talking completely. Their wine glasses hung halfway to their lips. Their phones, which had been ready to record her failure, now captured something extraordinary instead. Margaret lost herself in the music. She forgot about the people watching her. She forgot about her cleaning uniform and her rough hands. She forgot about being invisible and ignored. There was only the piano and the melody that poured from her soul. Her left hand played the deep bass notes that gave the music its foundation. Her right hand danced over the higher keys, creating the beautiful melody that Chopin had written more than 100 years ago. Even with some keys broken, Margaret found ways to make the music sound complete. When a black key stuck and would not move, she used a different key nearby. When a white key made a buzzing sound, she played it more softly. She adapted the music to fit the broken piano, making it sound like this was exactly how Chopin meant it to be played. The people who had expected to laugh at her stood frozen in amazement. The man with the red bow tie, who had started this whole thing as a joke, stared at Margaret with his mouth open. The woman in the blue dress forgot to breathe. Margaret's body swayed gently as she played, the way her grandmother had taught her. "Music must move through your whole body," her grandmother used to say. "Not just your fingers, but your heart and your soul too." The Chopin piece was long and complex. It had quiet parts that sounded like whispers, and loud parts that filled the whole room with power. Margaret played every section perfectly, her memory guiding her fingers to exactly the right places. As the music continued, more people began to gather. Guests from other parts of the building heard the piano and came to see who was playing. The hotel workers, waiters, bartenders, security guards stopped their jobs to listen. Even the concert hall managers, who were counting money, in their office upstairs heard the music and came down to investigate. They could not believe what they were seeing. The cleaning lady they barely noticed was playing classical music like a professional concert pianist. Margaret reached the most difficult part of the piece. Her fingers had to move very fast, jumping across the keys in complicated patterns. This was the part where most amateur pianists made mistakes. But Margaret's hands remembered every note, every rhythm, every tiny detail. The broken keys actually made it harder to play, but Margaret adjusted without even thinking about it. When she needed to play a broken key, she found another way to create the same sound. She made the damaged piano sing like it was brand new. The lobby had become completely silent except for the music. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop making noise. Everyone was holding their breath, afraid to break the spell that Margaret had created. Her playing was not just technically perfect, it was full of emotion, all the pain and longing and hope she had carried inside her for 30 years. The music told the story of her life, the joy of childhood, the sadness of loss, the struggle to survive, and the dreams that never completely died. Tears began to form in Margaret's eyes as she played. She was remembering her grandmother's house, with its old piano and the smell of jasmine tea. She was remembering the feeling of being young and full of possibilities before life taught her to be practical and invisible. But these were not sad tears. They were tears of joy and relief. After hiding her gift for so long, Margaret was finally letting it shine. She was finally being true to who she really was, not who the world expected her to be. The audience watched in complete amazement. Many of them were crying too, though they did not understand why. The music was touching something deep inside them, something they had forgotten in their busy, wealthy lives. The woman with diamonds around her neck whispered to her husband, "This is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard." A young businessman who had come to the party to make business contacts found himself thinking about his childhood piano lessons and wondering why he had given them up. An older woman remembered her mother, who used to play piano in their living room 50 years ago. She had not thought about those memories in decades. Margaret continued playing, completely absorbed in the music. Her fingers moved with incredible speed and precision through the most challenging passages. She played with the passion of someone who had been forced to keep quiet for too long. The broken piano responded to her touch like a faithful old friend. Despite its damaged keys and worn hammers, it produced music that seemed to come from heaven itself. The imperfections in the instrument somehow made the music even more beautiful, like scars that tell the story of a life fully lived. As Margaret neared the end of the piece, she played with even more intensity. This was her moment, perhaps the only chance she would ever have to show the world who she really was. She poured everything she had into those final measures. The last section of the Chopin ballad was both gentle and powerful. It required incredible control to play the soft notes clearly while building to a dramatic ending. Margaret's hands moved like butterfly wings, touching the keys with perfect lightness and strength. The people watching her had forgotten why they came to this party. They had forgotten about their business deals and social status and expensive clothes. They were witnessing something pure and honest and true, a human soul expressing itself through music. Margaret played the final chord, letting it ring out in the silent room. The sound seemed to hang in the air forever, connecting with something eternal and beautiful. Then there was complete silence. Margaret lifted her hands from the keys and sat still on the bench. Her heart was pounding, not from the effort of playing, but from the emotion of finally letting her secret out. She had done it. After 30 years of hiding, she had shown the world her gift. The silence stretched on and on. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed. Margaret slowly turned around, to face the crowd. The people who had expected to laugh at her were staring at her with expressions of complete shock and wonder. For a moment that felt like hours. The cleaning lady and the wealthy guests looked at each other in the silence that followed the most beautiful music any of them had ever heard. Then someone started to clap. The first clap came from an old man standing near the back of the crowd. He was crying, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. His slow, steady clapping echoed through the silent lobby like drops of rain on a roof. Then a woman joined him. Then another person. Within seconds, the entire crowd was clapping thunderously. The sound filled the lobby and spilled out into the hallways of the concert hall. Margaret sat on the piano bench, overwhelmed by the noise and emotion around her. People were not just clapping. They were cheering, shouting, "Bravo!" and wiping tears from their eyes. These same people who had wanted to laugh at her just minutes before were now giving her a standing ovation. The applause went on and on. People could not seem to stop clapping. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that had changed them forever. The cleaning lady they had ignored for years was actually one of the most gifted pianists they had ever heard. "Incredible," shouted the man with the red bow tie, the same man who had started this whole thing as a cruel joke. "That was absolutely incredible." The woman in the blue dress was sobbing openly. "I have never heard anything so beautiful," she said to anyone who would listen. "Never in my whole life." Margaret looked around at all the faces staring at her, but they were different faces now. Before they had looked at her with amusement and superiority. Now they looked at her with respect and wonder. She was no longer invisible to them. A tall woman with gray hair pushed through the crowd. She was Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, the artistic director of the concert hall. Margaret had seen her many times but had never spoken to her. Dr. Harrison only talked to musicians and donors, not to cleaning staff. "My God," Dr. Harrison said, staring at Margaret in amazement. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Margaret's voice was shaky when she answered. "My grandmother taught me when I was little, in China." "Your grandmother?" Dr. Harrison could barely believe what she was hearing. "You mean you haven't had professional training? You haven't studied at a music school?" Margaret shook her head. "No, ma'am, just my grandmother, when I was very young." The crowd pressed closer, everyone wanting to hear Margaret's story. These rich people, who usually only cared about themselves, were hanging on every word she spoke. "But that's impossible," said a woman with pearls. "Nobody plays Chopin like that without years of professional study. You must be joking." "I'm not joking," Margaret said quietly. "I stopped playing when I was 12. That was 40 years ago." The silence that followed was different from the silence after her performance. This was the silence of people trying to understand something that seemed impossible. A young man with the expensive suit stepped forward. He was James Mitchell, a famous music critic who wrote for the city newspaper. He had come to the party to write about the wealthy donors, but now he had a much bigger story. 40 years, he said. "You haven't played piano for 40 years and you can still perform at that level?" Margaret nodded. "I used to hear music in my head sometimes when I was cleaning, but I never thought I could still play it." Mr. Mitchell shook his head in disbelief. "Ma'am, what you just played was professional level. Better than professional level. That was concert hall quality performance." Dr. Harrison was studying Margaret with new eyes. "What happened? Why did you stop playing?" Margaret felt uncomfortable, with all the attention. She was not used to talking about her past, especially not to a room full of strangers. "My grandmother got sick," she said softly. "We had to sell the piano to pay for medicine. After she died, there was no money for music. Lessons, I had to work. The crowd listened in complete silence. These people, who had so much money they bought pianos as decorations for their homes, were learning about someone who had to sell their only piano just to survive. Then I came to America with my husband. Margaret continued. We both worked, many jobs just to pay rent and buy food. There was no time for music, no money for a piano. A woman near the front started crying again. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, she whispered. Mr. Mitchell was taking notes on his phone. This is an incredible story, he said. The world needs to know about this. But Margaret looked scared by that idea. Please no, I don't want to be famous. I just want to keep my job. Dr. Harrison stepped closer to Margaret. Keep your job? My dear woman, after what I just heard, I want to offer you a very different kind of job. The crowd murmured with excitement. What was the artistic director planning? I want you to give concerts here, Dr. Harrison said. I want you to perform on our main stage. I want the whole city to hear what you can do. Margaret's eyes grew wide. But I'm just the cleaning lady. No, said Dr. Harrison firmly. You are not just anything. You are a musician, a true artist. And it's time the world recognized that. The crowd started clapping again, this time in agreement with Dr. Harrison's words. They wanted to see Margaret succeed. They wanted to be part of her transformation, from invisible cleaning woman to celebrated pianist. But Margaret was shaking her head. I can't, I'm too old, I'm not good enough. Look at me, I'm nobody special. An older gentleman with a kind face stepped forward. He was Mr. Robert Chen, no relation to Margaret, a retired piano teacher who had taught many famous musicians. My dear lady, he said gently. What you just played was not the work of nobody special. That was the work of someone with extraordinary natural talent. Age doesn't matter. Background doesn't matter. Music is music, and you have it inside you. Margaret looked around at all the faces staring at her. For the first time in her life, people were seeing her as more than just a cleaning woman. They were seeing her as a human being with value and talent. I don't have the right clothes, she said, looking down at her cleaning uniform. The woman with diamonds laughed, but it was a kind laugh now. Clothes can be bought, dear. Talent like yours cannot be. You played in a cleaning uniform and made the most beautiful music I've ever heard. What you wear doesn't matter. A younger woman stepped forward. She was Sarah Johnson, the wife of a wealthy businessman. I want to help, she said. I want to sponsor your first concert. I'll pay for everything, the marketing, the clothes, whatever you need. Other people began volunteering to help too. Someone offered to donate a piano to Margaret's apartment so she could practice. Another person offered to pay for her to take refresher lessons with the best teachers in the city. Margaret felt dizzy from all the offers and attention. An hour ago, these same people had seen her as entertainment for their cruel joke. Now they wanted to make her dreams come true. I need time to think, Margaret said, feeling overwhelmed. Of course, said Dr. Harrison, but please don't wait too long. The world has been waiting 40 years to hear your music. Don't make us wait much longer. As the crowd began to break up, people kept coming over to Margaret to shake her hand and tell her how much her music had moved them. They looked at her differently now, not as a servant but as someone with a precious gift. The phones that had been ready to record her embarrassment had instead captured her triumph. Videos of Margaret playing the broken piano were already being shared online, spreading her story around the world. Margaret sat quietly on the piano bench as the lobby slowly emptied. Her hands were still shaking from the experience. She looked down at the keys of the old piano, the instrument that had helped reveal her secret. For 30 years she had been invisible. Tonight she had become someone the whole world would want to see. When the last guest finally left the lobby, Margaret still sat at the broken piano. Her legs felt weak and her hands were trembling. She could not believe what had just happened. One moment she was the invisible cleaning lady, and the next moment she was surrounded by people calling her a genius. Dr. Harrison approached her slowly, as if Margaret might disappear like a dream. Are you all right, my dear? She asked with genuine concern. Margaret looked up with tears in her eyes. I think so. I'm scared. Scared of what? Scared that this isn't real? Scared that I'll wake up tomorrow and everything will be the same as before. Dr. Harrison sat down on a nearby chair. This is very real, Margaret. What happened here tonight will change your life forever, if you let it. Margaret wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The same hands that had just played beautiful music were rough and red from years of cleaning chemicals. I need to tell you something, Dr. Harrison said. I've been the artistic director here for 20 years. I've heard thousands of musicians play on our stages. What you did tonight was special. Not just good, special. Margaret looked confused. But I made mistakes. Some notes were wrong because of the broken keys. That's exactly what made it so incredible, Dr. Harrison explained. You took a damaged instrument and made it sing like an angel. You didn't let the broken keys stop you. You found a way around them. That's what real musicians do. A security guard came over to them. It was Frank, an older man who had worked at the concert hall almost as long as Margaret. He had watched her performance from the doorway. Margaret, he said quietly, in 30 years of working here, I never heard anything like that. You made that old piano sound like it was worth $1 million. Margaret smiled at Frank. He was one of the few people in the building who had always treated her with kindness. Thank you, Frank. That means a lot coming from you. Dr. Harrison stood up. Margaret, I need to ask you something important. Would you be willing to perform here again? On our main stage for a real concert? The idea terrified Margaret. Playing for 30 rich people in the lobby was one thing. Playing for hundreds of people in the main concert hall was something completely different. I don't know if I can, she said honestly. I haven't played in front of people since I was a child. But you just did, Dr. Harrison pointed out. And you were magnificent. Margaret looked at the broken piano keys. This old piano helped me. I know all its problems. I know which keys stick and which ones buzz. I don't know if I could play on a perfect piano. Dr. Harrison smiled. Every piano is different, Margaret. Good musicians learn to adapt to whatever instrument they're playing. That's exactly what you did tonight. James Mitchell, the music critic, came back into the lobby. He had been interviewing some of the guests about what they had witnessed. Margaret, he said, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to write about you in tomorrow's newspaper. This story needs to be told. Margaret felt panic rising in her chest. Please don't. I don't want people to know about me. Why not? Mr. Mitchell asked gently. Your story is inspiring. Think about all the people who have hidden talents they're afraid to share. Think about all the people who think they're too old or too poor or too ordinary to follow their dreams. Dr. Harrison nodded. He's right, Margaret. Your story could help many people. But what if people don't believe it? Margaret worried. What if they think I'm lying about not having lessons? Mr. Mitchell pulled out his phone. I recorded your performance tonight. Nobody who hears this will doubt your talent. And I spoke to several guests who saw you play. They're all willing to confirm what happened. Margaret felt overwhelmed again. Everything was moving so fast. A few hours ago, her biggest worry was finishing her cleaning before dawn. Now people were talking about newspapers and concerts and changing her whole life. Can I think about it? She asked. All of this is so new to me. Of course, said Dr. Harrison. But I want you to know that I'm serious about my offer. I want to give you a chance to share your gift with the world. A young woman came running into the lobby. It was Lisa, one of the waitresses from the party. She was out of breath and excited. Margaret, she called out, you have to see this. Lisa held up her phone, showing a video on social media. It was Margaret playing the broken piano. The video already had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. People are sharing this everywhere, Lisa said. They're calling you the hidden piano angel and the miracle cleaning lady. Look at these comments. Margaret took the phone with shaking hands and read some of the comments. This made me cry. So beautiful. I can't believe this woman has been hiding this talent. This is what real music sounds like. She's better than most concert pianists I've heard. Where can I hear her play again? Margaret handed the phone back, feeling dizzy. This is happening too fast. Dr. Harrison put a gentle hand on Margaret's shoulder. I understand this is overwhelming, but Margaret, you have a choice to make. You can go back to being invisible, or you can step into the light and share your gift. What if I'm not good enough? Margaret asked. What if tonight was just luck? Frank, the security guard, laughed kindly. Margaret, luck doesn't play Chopin like that. You've got something special, and it's time you believed in yourself. Mitchell was still taking notes. Margaret, can you tell me about your grandmother? She sounds like she was an important person in your life. Margaret's eyes softened when she thought about her grandmother. She was everything to me. She taught me that music was a gift from heaven. She said if you have this gift, you must share it with others. It sounds like she was a wise woman, Dr. Harrison said. What do you think she would tell you to do right now? Margaret closed her eyes and tried to imagine her grandmother's voice. She could almost hear the old woman speaking to her across the years. She would tell me to be brave, Margaret whispered. She would tell me that hiding my gift is like putting a candle under a basket. The light can't help anyone if nobody can see it. When Margaret opened her eyes, she saw everyone looking at her with hope and encouragement. These people who had been strangers an hour ago now seemed to care about what happened to her. I'm scared, Margaret admitted. But I think I want to try. Dr. Harrison smiled widely. That's all we need to hear. We'll take this one step at a time. First, we'll get you a piano to practice on. Then we'll arrange some coaching sessions with our best teachers. And when you're ready, we'll plan your debut concert. Margaret felt tears coming again, but they were happy tears this time. For the first time in 30 years, she was going to be a musician again. There's just one thing, she said. I want to keep my cleaning job for now. Until I'm sure this is real. Dr. Harrison laughed. Margaret, after tonight, you'll never need to clean another floor unless you want to. But if it makes you feel secure, you can keep your job as long as you like. As they talked about plans and possibilities, Margaret kept looking at the broken piano. This old, forgotten instrument had changed her life in ways she never could have imagined. Tomorrow, everything would be different. Tonight, she was still Margaret Chen, the cleaning lady. But tomorrow, she would begin her journey to becoming Margaret Chen, the pianist. The world was about to discover what her grandmother had known all along, that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places. The next morning, Margaret woke up in her small apartment and wondered if the night before had been a dream. But when she looked at her phone, she saw dozens of missed calls and text messages. The story was real, and it was spreading fast. The IT newspaper article by James Mitchell was on the front page. The headline read, Hidden Genius Concert Hall Cleaning Lady Stuns Crowd with Masterful Piano Performance. Below it was a photo of Margaret sitting at the broken piano, her cleaning uniform visible as her hands danced over the keys. Margaret read the article with amazement. Mr. Mitchell had written about her childhood in China, her grandmother's teachings, and the sacrifice of selling their piano. He described her performance as transcendent, and one of the most moving musical experiences I have witnessed in 20 years of music criticism. But it was the personal details that made Margaret cry. The article told the whole story, how she had come to America with nothing, how she had worked hard jobs to survive, how her husband David had died from exhaustion. It showed that behind the invisible cleaning lady was a real person with dreams, and losses and incredible hidden talent. Margaret's phone rang. It was Dr. Harrison. Margaret, I hope you're ready for this, Dr. Harrison said. The story has gone national. I've had calls from television stations, radio shows, and recording companies. Everyone wants to meet you. Margaret felt her stomach drop. I don't think I can handle all that attention. You don't have to handle it all at once, Dr. Harrison said kindly. But Margaret, you need to understand what's happening. Your story isn't just about music. It's about not giving up on your dreams. It's about finding beauty in unexpected places. People need to hear this story right now. That afternoon, Margaret went to work at the concert hall as usual. But everything was different. When she walked through the employee entrance, other workers stopped to stare at her. Some clapped. Others asked for her autograph. Frank, the security guard, grinned when he saw her. There's our famous pianist, he said. Margaret, you're all anyone can talk about today. In the lobby, Margaret saw the broken piano where everything had changed. Someone had put flowers on top of it, and a small sign that read, "Where Margaret?" Chen revealed her gift to the world. Dr. Harrison found Margaret in the hallway. "Come with me," she said. "There are some people I want you to meet." She led Margaret to her office, where several important-looking people were waiting. "Margaret," Dr. Harrison said, "this is Professor Williams from the Music Conservatory, Mrs. Rodriguez from the city's Cultural Foundation, and Mr. Thompson from Classical Music Today magazine." Margaret felt nervous meeting all these important people. But they looked at her with respect, not like she was just a cleaning lady. Professor Williams, an elderly man with white hair, spoke first. "Ms. Chen, I've been teaching piano for 45 years. I listened to the recording of your performance last night, and I must tell you, what you did was extraordinary. Not just the technical skill, but the emotional depth. Where did that come from?" Margaret thought about how to explain it. "I think it came from all the years of not being able to play. All the sadness and happiness I kept inside came out through the music." "That's exactly right," Professor Williams said. "The greatest musicians don't just play notes. They play their lives, their experiences, their hearts. You did that last night." Mrs. Rodriguez leaned forward. "Margaret, we want to help you share your gift with more people. The Cultural Foundation would like to sponsor a series of concerts featuring your story. We think it could inspire many people in our community, and I'd like to do a feature story about you for our magazine," Mr. Thompson added. "Your story shows that musical talent exists everywhere, not just in expensive music schools." Margaret looked around at all these people who wanted to help her. It was overwhelming, but also wonderful. "Can I ask you something?" Margaret said. "Why does everyone care so much about my story?" Dr. Harrison smiled. "Because most people have given up on their dreams, Margaret. They think it's too late, or they're not good enough, or people like them don't get chances. You proved all of that wrong." Professor Williams nodded. "And because in our world of perfect recordings and auto-tune, you showed us what real, honest music sounds like. You played with your soul, not just your fingers." That evening, Margaret received a phone call that surprised her more than all the others. The voice on the phone was speaking Chinese. "Margaret Chen?" the voice asked in Mandarin. "This is Chen Wei from Beijing Television. We heard about your story here in China. The whole country is talking about you." Margaret almost dropped the phone. "China knows about me?" "Your story is everywhere here," the reporter continued in Chinese. "People are calling you a hero. They say you represent the Chinese immigrants who came to America and kept their culture alive. Can we interview you?" After Margaret hung up the phone, she sat in her small apartment and tried to understand what was happening to her life. Her story had traveled all the way back to the country where it began, where her grandmother had first taught her to play. The next few days brought more surprises. Margaret learned that several famous pianists had shared the video of her performance on social media. A world-famous Chinese pianist named Li Yundi posted, "This is what music education should be about, passing down beauty from grandmother to granddaughter. Margaret Chen honors all of us who love music." Sarah Johnson, the wealthy woman who had offered to sponsor Margaret's first concert, visited her at work. "Margaret," she said, "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about your grandmother, teaching you that music is a gift from heaven. I believe that's true. And I believe gifts are meant to be shared." She handed Margaret an envelope. "I've rented the main concert hall for next month. I want you to give your first official concert. We'll call it The Grandmother's Gift, in honor of the woman who taught you." Margaret opened the envelope and saw a check for more money than she made in a whole year. "I can't take this," Margaret said. "It's too much." "It's not too much for someone who made me remember why I love music," Sarah said. "Margaret, when I was young, I wanted to be a musician, but my parents said it wasn't practical. They made me study business instead. Listening to you play reminded me of what I gave up." Margaret understood. "You have regrets." "Many regrets," Sarah admitted. "But helping you follow your dreams will help heal some of mine." That night, Margaret called her only remaining family member. her cousin Lin, who still lived in China. "Lin, have you heard what's happening?" Margaret asked in Chinese. "Margaret, the whole village is talking about you. They're so proud. Your grandmother's spirit must be so happy." Margaret started crying. "I miss her so much, Lin. I wish she could see this." "She can see it," Lin said firmly. "And Margaret, I have something to tell you. Remember your grandmother's piano? The one your family had to sell?" "Of course, I think about it all the time." "I found it," Lin said. "It's in an antique shop in Beijing. The owner wants to sell it back to your family. He said if you're famous now, maybe you'd want your grandmother's piano back." Margaret couldn't speak for a moment. The idea of getting back her grandmother's piano seemed impossible, like a fairy tale. "How much does he want?" she finally asked. "Less than you might think. The piano is very old and some keys don't work, but he knows the story. He wants it to go back to the right family." After Margaret hung up the phone, she sat quietly in her apartment. In just a few days, her whole world had changed. She had gone from being invisible to being famous. She had gone from having no piano to possibly getting back the most important piano in her life. But the biggest change was inside herself. For the first time in 30 years, Margaret felt like she knew who she really was. She wasn't just a cleaning lady who happened to play piano. She was a pianist who happened to clean buildings, and soon she might not need to do that anymore. The broken piano at the concert hall had revealed her secret to the world. Now the whole world wanted to hear what other beautiful music she had been hiding inside her heart. 1 month later, Margaret stood backstage at the Harmony Concert Hall, wearing a beautiful black dress that Sarah Johnson had bought for her. Through the curtains, she could hear the audience filling the main concert hall, the same hall she had cleaned for 15 years. Tonight was her official debut concert, The Grandmother's Gift. All 800 seats were sold out. People had traveled from other cities to hear the cleaning lady who had become an overnight sensation. Dr. Harrison came backstage to check on Margaret. "How are you feeling?" Margaret's hands were shaking. "Terrified," she admitted. "What if I forget how to play? What if I disappoint everyone?" "Margaret," Dr. Harrison said gently, "do you see that piano on the stage?" Margaret peeked through the curtains at the beautiful grand piano waiting for her under the bright lights. "That's not just any piano," Dr. Harrison continued. "That's the piano from Beijing, your grandmother's piano." Margaret gasped. "But how? Lynn said it would take months to ship it here. Sarah Johnson paid to have it flown here as a surprise. She had it completely restored by the best piano technicians in the country. Every key works perfectly now, but it still has the same heart your grandmother played." Margaret started crying. "I can't believe it. My grandmother's piano is here." "She's here too, Margaret. In that piano, in your hands, in your heart. You're not performing alone tonight." As showtime approached, Margaret walked to the side of the stage and looked out at the audience. She saw faces she recognized: Dr. Harrison, Sarah Johnson, Professor Williams, James Mitchell, the music critic. But she also saw many faces she didn't know, people who had come just to hear her story through music. In the front row, she spotted Frank the security guard, wearing his best suit. Next to him sat Lisa the waitress and several other workers from the concert hall. These people who had been invisible like her were now honored guests. But the biggest surprise was in the third row. Margaret saw a group of Chinese people, including an elderly woman who looked familiar. "Margaret," said a voice behind her. She turned to see Lin, her cousin from China. "Lin, how are you here?" "The Chinese community in America raised money to bring some of us here for your concert, and look, I brought someone special." Lin gestured to the elderly woman in the audience. "That's Mrs. Wang, your grandmother's best friend. She's 93 years old, but she insisted on coming. She said she had to hear you play your grandmother's piano one more time." Margaret felt overwhelmed with emotion. Her past and present were coming together in ways she had never imagined possible. The stage manager approached. "Ms. Chen, it's time." Margaret walked onto the stage, and the audience erupted in applause. The lights were bright, but she could still see the faces looking at her with hope and expectation. She sat at her grandmother's piano and placed her hands on the familiar keys. They felt different now, smoother, more responsive, but they still carried the memory of all the music that had been played on them over the decades. "Good evening," Margaret said into the microphone. Her voice was shaky but clear. 30 years ago, I thought I would never play piano again. Tonight, I get to play my grandmother's piano for all of you. She taught me that music is a gift from heaven, and gifts are meant to be shared. She began with the same Chopin piece she had played on the broken piano a month ago. But tonight, on her grandmother's restored piano, it sounded even more beautiful. Every note was clear and perfect. As she played, Margaret felt her grandmother's presence. She could almost see the old woman's hands guiding hers, just like when she was 5 years old. The audience listened in complete silence, many people crying openly. This wasn't just a concert. It was a story being told through music. A story of loss and hope and dreams that never die. Margaret played other pieces her grandmother had taught her, Chinese folk songs, classical pieces, and melodies that carried the memories of her childhood. With each song, she felt stronger and more confident. During the intermission, Margaret was approached by a man she didn't recognize. "Ms. Chen," he said, "I'm David Park from the International Music Foundation. We'd like to offer you something very special." He handed her an envelope. "This is an invitation to perform at Carnegie Hall in New York City. It would be the first time a cleaning lady has ever played that famous stage." Margaret stared at the invitation in disbelief. Carnegie Hall was the most famous concert hall in America, where only the greatest musicians in the world performed. "But I'm not trained like other concert pianists," Margaret said. "That's exactly why we want you," Mr. Park replied. "You represent something pure and honest about music. You play from your heart, not from textbooks." The second half of the concert was even more powerful than the first. Margaret played with complete freedom, letting her emotions flow through the music. She thought about her journey from a little girl in China to a cleaning lady in America to a celebrated pianist on stage. For her final piece, Margaret played a song her grandmother had written, a simple melody that had never been performed in public before. As she played, she spoke to the audience. "My grandmother wrote this song about hope," she said while her fingers moved over the keys. "She said that no matter how hard life becomes, there is always a reason to hope. Even when we think our dreams are dead, they are just sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake up." When the concert ended, the audience gave Margaret a standing ovation that lasted for 10 minutes. People were cheering, crying, and calling for more music. Margaret looked out at all the faces and realized that her story had become part of their stories. Every person in that audience had dreams they had given up on, or talents they had hidden. Tonight, she had shown them that it's never too late to let those dreams come alive again. After the concert, Margaret was surrounded by well-wishers and reporters, but she made her way to Mrs. Wang, her grandmother's old friend. The elderly woman took Margaret's hands in hers and spoke in Chinese. "Your grandmother would be so proud. You have honored her memory and shared her gift with the world." "Thank you for coming," Margaret replied in Chinese. "Having you here made me feel like she was here too." Later that night, Margaret stood alone on the stage with her grandmother's piano. The audience had gone home, but she could still feel their energy and love in the room. She played one more song, a lullaby her grandmother used to sing to her when she was very small. As the gentle melody filled the empty concert hall, Margaret finally understood what her grandmother had meant about music being a gift from heaven. It wasn't just about the ability to play piano. It was about the power to touch people's hearts, to remind them of their own dreams and to show them that beauty can be found in the most unexpected places. 6 months later, Margaret performed at Carnegie Hall to a sold-out audience. Her story had inspired people around the world to pursue their hidden talents and forgotten dreams. She had become a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever felt invisible or overlooked. The broken piano that had started it all was restored and placed in the lobby of the Harmony Concert Hall with a plaque that read, "In honor of Margaret Chen, who proved that beautiful music can come from anywhere, and it's never too late to share your gifts with the world." Margaret still lived in her small apartment, but now it had a beautiful piano where she practiced every day. She gave concerts around the world, but she also taught piano to children in her neighborhood, passing on her grandmother's gift to a new generation. Sometimes reporters asked Margaret if she ever regretted the 30 years she spent not playing piano. No, she would always answer. Those years taught me about life, about struggle, about the value of dreams. Without those experiences, my music would not have the same heart. Everything happened exactly when it was supposed to happen. The cleaning lady who had been invisible for so long had become one of the most celebrated pianists in the world. But more importantly, she had shown millions of people that it's never too late to let your light shine, no matter how long you've kept it hidden. Margaret Chen had finally become who she was always meant to be.